We're happy this evening to have a conversation with James Tufenkian, founder of the Tufenkian Foundation and known for his business activities in Armenia and abroad. I'm Antranik Kasparian from the Tufenkian Foundation, and we're going to have hopefully an informative and leisurely conversation about the foundation, its work, as well as the man behind the work. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. So I thought, James, maybe a good place to start is to talk broadly about your background as a human being and how that led you on a winding path to Armenia.
I didn't grow up as an Armenian. I mean, I knew I was Armenian. My family was, we ate Armenian food sometimes. My relatives were naturally Armenian, but our name was not Armenian. My father had changed it years before. And it really wasn't until I learned about the genocide when I was about 20 years old that I came to any kind of Armenian identity. That was sort of a turning point for me when I sort of realized what had happened to our people, realized that we were on the verge of disappearing as a race as a result of a deliberate attempt to make us disappear. And I was personally disappearing as an Armenian and didn't want to participate in that. So I sort of took my stand to become Armenian, and starting in my early 20s, I moved to New York, went to graduate school there primarily so I could get involved in Armenian community. And that led me into just a whole other wonderful world. At the same time, I guess it's important to mention that early on in my life, I had sort of this philosophical awakening where I decided that, I had to decide what my life was going to be about, what was the significance of it, what was going to make me feel good at the end of my life, looking back on what I had done. And I realized that really the thing that I ought to focus on would be to try and help other people and try to help make the world better. And from early days, I had set out to basically get a good education, make a lot of money fast, and then spend the rest of my life using the money to make the world better. So that really then coalesced with my Armenian identity reemergence in my 20s, and led me into a whole lot of other things.
You sometimes refer to yourself as a born-again Armenian. What was the reawakening like? How did it feel to suddenly take on a new mission, a new purpose in your life, and a new identity in your life?
Yeah, it was very exciting. I mean, and all the time that I was growing up, and I was, I had this vague idea that I was Armenian, though I knew very little about what it meant. I had some kind of a vague sort of pride in it. But when I learned about the genocide, a couple big things happened. One, it really offended my sense of justice and really gave me a mission then. It wasn't just casually. I didn't want to become Armenian just because I wanted to go to parties and meet beautiful Armenian girls. It was really much more about, this sort of mission and the need to accomplish justice for our people. And then it was this whole exciting thing of entering into this whole new world, this new culture. I had this sort of magical image of Armenians, partly because I knew little about them. I hadn't had a chance to get jaded about them like a lot of people who grow up in the Armenian community. It was sort of that enthusiasm and excitement that drove me the whole time.
How would you describe the winding path or the odyssey that led you to Armenia?
So, it was really, this awakening, Armenianness happened in the very early 80s. And it's a really strange path if you get into it, because my first real business was Oriental carpets. Just briefly, I think I can safely say that I created really the first 20th century or 21st century version of the rug business, bringing this really antiquated business, traditional, unsophisticated, kind of ethnic enclave business into modern business practices. When I had this idea just after graduate school to create a brand and to control production of the carpets, to design for the market, all of these things that had never been done in rugs before. So, and part of the reason I was thinking about rugs and got involved in rugs was because it gave me a chance to be around more Armenians. I got a real kick out of being around old Armenian rug dealers. They thought I was absolutely crazy for thinking about getting into the rug business when I had this great education and everything and lots of opportunities. But for me, again, it was just pure fun to be able to go in that direction. I'm sorry, you were asking me...
Your winding path to Armenia.
Oh, yeah, right. See, it's going to wind a lot.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I had started this business in the mid-'80s, and it became successful very quickly. And by the time the independence came around, I was doing very well, and I'd started a production of Oriental carpets in Nepal, and I really knew pretty much how to do that. So independence came, and of course right after, or just along with it, came the Karabakh War and the blockade from Turkey and Azerbaijan, and families here freezing in their homes and burning their books and furnitures to stay warm in the winters. And I was watching all of this along with the Karabakh War from my comfortable enclave in New York. And I mean, the Karabakh struggle itself was extremely moving to me, and I was dealing with extreme guilt about sitting in the United States doing absolutely nothing to help or nothing significant when my countrymen were under such assault, and Armenians of all, from all backgrounds, of all ages, were picking up their lives and moving to Karabakh to take up the struggle. So I started asking around 1993, I started just saying, okay, I've got to get involved, what can I do? And the thing at that time, I mean, what Armenia really needed, and everybody pretty much agreed, is they needed jobs and they needed employment. The economy, everything was in shambles. I mean, the social structure, the education, everything had collapsed with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And there was really nothing operating in terms of business and employment opportunities. My kind of carpet making, which is extremely by hand, uses huge amounts of labor. And I looked at Armenia and I realized we had this background of carpet weaving, and we had great wool in the sheep in the countryside, and we basically had everything that we needed in order to make carpets here. So I thought I had a chance to come over here and see if I could start up a production of carpets.
Yeah, if I can comment, I think at the time many people thought you were crazy.
And still do.
Yeah. Armenia of the early 90s was often treated as a basket case. The Soviet Union had collapsed, Armenia's economy was a shambles, and I think most diasporan Armenians were thinking of ways to aid Armenia. Armenia was viewed as an aid recipient or an assistance recipient, and yet you thought of it as a potential business environment or investment environment. That has to be viewed as very strange. Reflecting now back on those years, how do you view it?
Well, I mean, first of all, you know, the reason why I took that course and a lot of other people just were donating money is because I was fortunate enough to have this sort of ready-made opportunity to do something here. I mean, in a land where there's no electricity and land transportation is pretty much cut off from all sides and everything, it wasn't easy to think of things you could do to put people to work here. So I was kind of uniquely situated, and that was a fantastic thing. The other thing was my background working in Nepal and also China was in working in really crazy, chaotic environments, and I was already used to it. I mean, I was probably the only person over here that wasn't just shocked and horrified to try and do business in this crazy environment. You know, while it was strange and while it did look crazy from the outside, given my particular circumstances, it wasn't that weird.
Right.
Yeah.
Sounds like it. And can you just describe briefly what it was like during the early startup years?
Yeah, I mean, I often describe it as everything in complete collapse and total chaos. And I mean, you know, just an example of the kind of Now I'll talk about, trying to do business in that kind of environment. People had no standards of value at that time. And the ruble had totally collapsed, and so that was worth nothing, and there was always the dollar. And they had no idea what the value of a dollar was. I mean, a dollar bought a lot of rubles, and you could buy pretty good stuff with a dollar, but they also had a very strange idea of people from the other side what a dollar was to us. So, I mean, you could literally be trying to buy cigarettes from somebody and they'd ask you for $100,000 or something, They just had no idea. And then in that kind of environment, you're trying to negotiate business deals with people to buy wool, to engage people, to manage weaving, to manage spinning of yarn, to be employees. And in that kind of environment, to try and negotiate any kind of rational agreement about hundreds of different things was just completely insane. Yeah. One guy who had been related to the carpet manufacturing production here before the independence, we went to visit this guy out in Artig in the middle of winter, and we're at his house and trying to get him excited about the idea of starting up spinning yarn for us. And we're telling him, what's going to be involved, and it can be regular income, and you can make money, and yada, yada, yada. And he's not hardly even listening. So I leaned over to my newly hired manager and whispered in his ear. I said, tell him he can make $100 a month doing this. And so the manager said, and you can make $100 a month doing this. And the guy immediately sat up and he suddenly was interested, and then we began in business. But it was just that kind of a weird environment. And everything had broken down. My friends still laugh about meeting me on airplanes going to Armenia in my second, third, fourth visit here when I was trying to start up production. And one of them always says, she asked me what I'm going to do in Armenia, and I said, we're looking for sheep. We're literally going to the countryside and trying to figure out where there are sheep that we can buy wool from.
But there must have been a lot of other challenges as well. I mean, we hear stories about businessmen from diaspora coming in the early 90s trying to invest and getting fleeced. So how did you manage to be an exception to that rule, if you will?
Yeah, I had a very different and kind of outsider approach to it, because all of these businessmen, and I think the ones who got it the worst were the ones who considered themselves really savvy and they knew how to play the game. They tended to arrive here, rent an expensive car, and drive directly from the airport to the president's office to announce that they are here, that they're ready to invest big amounts of money in the country, and so forth and so on. And at that point, the parasites all started to attach themselves to them, and they'd end up going in completely a wrong direction, and the whole point of it for the locals was to take their money. I had a completely opposite view, which was that we really, there was at that time all this talk about the mafia and these newly powerful guys in the government, that you always had to be careful what you were doing. They'd come in and take whatever you had. So our philosophy was to fly under the radar. And for the first 8 years or so I was here, we tried to be invisible. We did almost nothing with the government that we didn't ever have to do, never asked the government for any help, nothing. We just flew under the radar. And I think that was a huge differentiator and really accounted for a lot of our relative success.
So looking at that early path, say through the 90s into the early 2000s, how do you view the carpet production that you established? What benefit did it bring to the country?
Yeah, okay, so at our peak, we started in 1993 in ground zero, and we really got the production going after we'd organized all the component parts in around 96, 97, and by 98, 1999, we were employing probably 1,000 people. We were producing about 1,000 square meters, 10,000 square feet a month of really great handmade carpets. We were introducing them to the world, Armenia sort of re-emerging. We were the world's first carpet-making country, and we had become invisible. And we were starting to re-emerge as a force. So that was sort of our peak. And at that time, at our peak, the drum was, I think, around 580. which made everything here really reasonable. Pricing, labor, materials, everything was very reasonable, very competitive with the outside world, and we were just ripping. The problem was that then the drums started to strengthen dramatically, very quickly. Ended up going down to about 300, which essentially doubled the cost of our production.
And within a span of 2 years.
Yeah, was it that much? Yeah, that's right. And that really killed the business. I mean, it drove us from being highly competitive to not very competitive at all. So, I maintained the business. It gradually went down, not as dramatically as the currency did. But now we're unfortunately just operating at a minimal level. We're focusing mostly on selling to the local market, the tourist market, et cetera. And I'm, trying to deal with the responsibility that me and a couple other people are sort of like the last link in the chain of Armenian carpet producing that goes back thousands of years.